Welcome to the best of the Leon Charney Report. For over 2 decades, Leon Charney, one of the architects of the historic Camp David Peace Accords, has interviewed some of the most important figures in modern-day history. These interviews provide a window into some of the most significant events of the last 50 years. In this excerpt, recorded in August of 2001, Leon Charney speaks with political consultant Stuart Stevens, who had just finished being the media director of the George W.Bush presidential campaign. Stevens discusses the life of a political consultant. Stuart Stevens is now the head of the Mitt Romney presidential campaign.
Welcome to another Leon Charney Report, and we're going to talk to you about George Bush today, and that's an interesting topic. We'll find out a little bit about what George Bush thinks, what we think he thinks about the Middle East, especially what's going on there, and all of us know how tragic it is with so much killing. We've got Stuart Stevens on, who worked on a Bush campaign, and he's written a really interesting book called The Big Enchilada, and that's obviously George W. Bush, not his senior, but the junior. Stuart, I read through parts of this book. It's very funny. You're a witty man.
Thanks.
What does a witty man do with a bunch of Texans, by the way?
Well, you know, I grew up in Mississippi, and all Mississippians aspire to be Texans. They see it as a higher state of being. And
They like the boots?
they like I think, the self-confidence the Texans have, which is very endearing, I think. You know, I think Americans like Texans more than they dislike them. I think this is one of the critical mistakes the Gore campaign made, was trying to attack Bush by attacking Texas, the way that in the first Bush campaign we attacked Massachusetts. And it just never worked for him.
Why did Bush win?
I think he won because of a national exhaustion with Clinton. And I think Gore lost the campaign the day that he went out on the South Lawn after Clinton was impeached and put on his pom-poms and called him the greatest president ever. It's one of these sort of Faustian bargains in life, I think, that had Gore and other members of the cabinet that Clinton had lied to, had they resigned or threatened to resign and forced Clinton to resign, which would have happened in England and in a lot of places, and Gore had become president, I think he'd still be president today.
Because of a parliamentary system, they would have brought him down. All right, Stuart, what was your position in the Bush campaign?
I worked on the television advertising and strategy, which is my background. I'm that evil permutation of the system known as a media consultant. I was brought into the campaign by Karl Rove, who I'd worked with a lot.
His senior political analyst,
right.
Or a strategist, really. Yeah.
Right. And a guy named Mark McKinnon, who really assembled the media team. Mark's this wonderful character from Austin, who had been a Democrat, had been Ann Richards' press secretary, actually.
Really?
Yeah. And
George Bush, we have to point out, beat Ann Richards in the governor's campaign.
In 94.
Right.
And Mark had been her press secretary in 90, when she beat Clady Williams, and what was seen as a big upset at the time, though Clady kind of committed suicide.
One second. Remember that remark that Ann Richards made at the convention, that George Bush was born, George Bush Sr., with a golden spoon, or something like that, right?
Born with this silver spoon. Yeah, she also used to say that he was born on third base and thought he hit a homer. Or thought he hit a triple, I guess. Which actually, I think Ann Richards really did a disservice. That was in the Dukakis convention.
Yeah.
Because, you know, once she kind of went with that nastiness and that personal attack, it kind of gave Republicans permission to go after Dukakis, and it was difficult for them to say, well, you know, we want to run a high-minded campaign. But a very flamboyant character, a real Texas character. And Mark had worked for Ann Richards and then gotten out of politics and had gotten to be friends with Governor Bush. They share this mutual interest in education. Mark has teenage daughters, as does President Bush. And the governor lured Mark out of retirement, and Mark brought me in really to be sort of his Republican beard. And I'd worked a lot in the...
Are you a Republican?
Yeah.
How long?
Oh, you know, when I grew up in Mississippi, we didn't have parties.
It's Southern Democrats.
There were only Democrats.
Southern Democrats.
So I was part of this crowd like Haley Barbour, that we all became Republicans. We didn't know what it meant.
Haley Barbour was the national chairman of the Republican Party.
Right.
A little overweight sometimes.
Haley's well fed, prosperous, shall we say. You know, he ran for the Senate against John Stennis, and I did his campaign, and he lost 60 pounds. And the night he lost the campaign, it was sort of a toss-up whether or not he was more disappointed to lose, but now he could eat again, so it was some consolation. But we all became Republicans, not because we knew what Republicans were, but because we knew we didn't want to be like the old-line Democrats who were, you know, John Stennis, John Eastland. It's very difficult to work both sides of the fence here. A few people have tried.
Dick Morris did it.
Dick, which is proof probably that it can't be done successfully.
It shouldn't be done.
David Garth is probably the most successful example here in New York.
Right.
But David gets away with it pretty much by only doing people that he can get to by subway. You know, he doesn't really work around the country as much.
David handled Koch and Giuliani.
And he handled Giuliani.
Right.
And he does Arlen Specter.
In Pennsylvania.
Which is a long subway ride, but close.
He was the first guy. Very few people know was getting involved in the campaigns in Israel.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that.
No. He originally tried to be involved or was involved with Asa Weitzman in a campaign for a party called Yachad in the 1980s. And he sent one of his people over there. He's very involved in Israel. And after that came Greenberg and Carvel. Where's Carvel from? Is he Mississippi?
Louisiana.
That's close enough. And they all went and ran this campaign, one for Barack, and then you had this guy in New York, this famous Finkelstein.
Arthur
Finkelstein.
I've worked a lot with Arthur.
Who was running BBs. Oh, we'll talk about him. He's also an interesting guy. Anyway, so you got connected to the Bush people.
I was brought down, and you know, normally...
Tell me the first thing you thought of when you saw George W. Bush.
He always has a twinkle. He's one of these guys who is always sort of kidding you or himself. You know, there's so much about life, but particularly about politics, that is sort of... You're sort of going through the motions. There's sort of social conventions here. You know, I met him over at Carl's house for dinner several years ago. And, you know...
Before you were working for him?
Before I was working for him. And ostensibly, it was not to talk to him about working for him.
Right.
But, you know, he knew there was a little bit of matchmaking going on here. And he loves to sort of let it be known that he knows these things. Whereas a lot of people would just sort of pretend that this wasn't happening. But he's always, you know... So Carl wants us to start dating. You know, I mean, that's classic George W. Bush.
Is he smart?
I think he's wicked smart.
People think the opposite.
I know. It's interesting. Just as they thought Jerry Ford was probably our most unathletic president, our most athletic president was unathletic.
Right.
I think that's really a function of life imitating high school, in the sense that he has let it be known that he really isn't concerned how sort of the particularly Eastern media elite judge him, whether or not they think he's smart or not smart. And I think that his sort of rejection of their ability to judge him tends to engender this sense, well, then, you know, he can't be very smart.
And he likes to keep it out there. It diffuses people.
He has a self-deprecating manner.
Yeah,
he's very unpompous.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I think that it's a sign of how smart he is that he has the confidence to do that. He's someone who doesn't always have to impress you that he knows more about something than anybody else, which is part of his sort of leadership/management style.
Well, you know what Bill Clinton said?
No.
He'd rather spend 1 hour with George Bush when they met.
Mm-hmm.
Was more invigorating for him than spending 8 years with Al Gore.
Did you really say that?
Newsweek printed that.
Well,
I'm sure that Bush thinks that Clinton's a very smart, charismatic guy too.
Yeah, he does. He has a lot of respect for his political skills.
I'm sure he does.
You know, President Bush is a very difficult guy not to like.
Seems
you know,
that way. I mean,
even my wife, who's sort of a communist, you know, used to always kid him that she was never going to vote for him, and you know, he's like, "Why? What are you going to vote for Al Gore? I can't imagine this." She goes, "No, I'm going to vote for Ralph Nader." He goes, "Well, that's okay. You can vote for Nader." But he has a wonderful way to really, in situations, policy situations, these kind of things, to really get to the central questions, kind of cut through the BS and sort of. And he's not afraid to ask like very fundamental questions. There's an incident that's been reported, and I wasn't there, I only know what I read about it, where, he was talking with national security people, and he was asking questions like, what is the role of the Army in our society? And I think this is like...
Good question.
This is a good question.
Very
good
question.
It's like a smart question,
Right.
But, if you want to make fun of it, you can say, well, look, what is this guy? He's asking, what is the role of the Army? He doesn't know what the role of the Army is. So, I think it's just how you look at this. And it's one of the sweet ironies for those of us who worked in the campaign and admire the man, which everyone who did work in the campaign, I think, did admire him, that you can make a good case that he won the campaign through the debates. And
really,
I think that Al Gore and the whole crowd around him really thought that in the debates that he would sort of
fade.
Yeah, just be like an ice cube on a summer sidewalk,
right.
and you'd see how smart Al Gore was, and George W.Bush, who was a Texan who, it would just be clear. And in fact, I think
the chances are, you remember the Nixon-Kennedy debates,
right?
People say that on the radio,
right,
Nixon won the debate, whereas
right.
Kennedy won on his personality
right.
in television. It's probably the same thing. If they would have argued on a radio without a visual, because Al Gore looked like he really is. He's sort of this. He thinks he is the smartest guy in the world,
right.
and he's got a lot of hubris in a funny way. And the other guy came off. Your friend Bush came off as a sincere, fun-loving, American guy who, likes to eat hot dogs and go out and...
But I think he came across as smart. And he, a lot of times Gore just says stuff like, what he said about Russia and Yugoslavia and Russia's role in Yugoslavia in that first debate. He just asserts things that are wrong, that are factually wrong.
Yeah, he did a lot of that.
But he does it with...
He invented the internet.
He does it with great panache. It's sort of a debating trick.
I've been with Al Gore. I know him fairly well.
Yeah.
And he should relax. A couple of Xanax or Valiums would help him. Really.
I've always heard that on a one-on-one or smaller groups, he's much more relaxed. I don't know. I've never seen him.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, huh?
It's interesting. His wife, she's far more tense than people think. If you meet her in person,
that's interesting.
She's a little bit tense. And maybe she has problems in her back. I don't know. But she's not relaxed. Or maybe the times that I met them, they were so hyped up to be on that. Who knows? When I know Jimmy Carter intimately well. I knew Yitzhak Rabin intimately well. I knew Shimon Peres. I know him very well. I know a lot of world leaders very well. I don't know Gore that well. I know him a little bit. Mm-hmm. When Jimmy Carter, you're alone with him one-on-one, he's the most charismatic guy in the world. And it's a spiritual experience to be with him. When you leave him, you feel that the world has a higher level of morality or something. He's just a spiritual man.
I can remember I was a student at Oxford in 1972, and he came over and spoke. This is, obviously before
he was a governor.
Right? Yeah, he was a governor, and he came over and kind of got together. Maybe it was 1973, and he got together sort of Southerners who were there, and just talked to us, a small group. I thought he was just wildly impressive.
He was very effective in a small group. I don't think he was a great public speaker.
Right.
I didn't think he communicated well, and I thought he was too truthful to the nation at times. That morose speech, who wants to hear morose?
Right.
I was at the convention when Walter Mondale said, I'm going to raise taxes. One
of my favorite moments.
That's a pass to lose elections. You don't have to try hard on that one. But we got to really discover who George Bush is. Now, you stay with him until when? Until after the election?
Well, until the end in Florida.
Yeah.
Though really for Florida, guys that do what I do, we had no role. I stayed in Austin, but we had this terrible predicament that instead of elections being decided by guys like me making commercials, they were being decided by judges. It clearly was a.
Has George W. read the book? Well, you don't know.
My friend Mark McKinnon, who I did the campaign with, He was staying in the White House and gave the president a copy, and apparently he did read it and liked it. And was telling Mark, in fact, this has been reported, somebody liked it.
Really?
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high to have this courageous man and my close friend killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. The preceding program was brought to you by Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.